On today's show, we're going to discuss the Florida Panthers going down 0-2 against the Vegas Golden Knights. We're going to discuss the Florida Panthers going down early, how the officiating was handled due to the many misconducts. We're also going to discuss whether we are encouraged about the power play despite the Florida Panthers losing 7-2. And we are going to ask the important question, is it time to panic?
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Tuesday, June 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, it's not a position that you want this Florida Panthers team to be in, especially after how they performed on the road this season. And, of course, with all the things that the players have said about being in the right headspace when it comes to going from one game to the other and then a 2-day gap in between games 1 and 2. But the Florida Panthers, they got down early, and this game wasn't even close for the Panthers. Sergei Bobrovsky gets pulled in this one after the fourth goal, and it doesn't get better after that. And Alex Lyon gives up 3 more goals after that for the Florida Panthers to drop this game against the Vegas Golden Knights by a final score of 7-2 in Sin City, as now the series shifts to Sunrise on Thursday night. But we do have a special guest here on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. He is the former sideline reporter / producer for Fox Sports Florida, Frank Forte. Frank, welcome back to Locked On Panthers.
Thanks, Armando. Good to be with you. Certainly not the result we were all hoping for, but it kind of is what it is. We now know what the Toronto and Carolina fans were feeling. So maybe the hockey gods are just tamping down our emotions a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt. And you think about the joy of victory and then the agony of defeat when it comes to the ups and downs of just sports in general. But I mean, let's just go right into it. I mean, Vegas gets out to a lead 7 minutes in, and the multiple looks by Vegas, and even the first 2 goals for the Vegas Golden Knights, it was really about one thing and one thing only: puck retrieval for the Vegas Golden Knights early on. And that's really they look faster when it came to that. And also the Florida Panthers, let's also consider the fact that they went 10 minutes without a shot on goal early on before they went on the power play, and the power play was looking really good for the Panthers. They had 5 shots on goal in their first power play, and they broke up a 3-on-2, went the other way on a 3-on-2 as well, but couldn't get it on net. There was a breakaway early by Carter Verhaeghe for an opportunity to take the lead early as well.
That's where I was going to go back to, Armando.
Yeah,
even before Vegas got on the board. Swaggy gets the breakaway, and I really think he had no choice but to go backhand, because I think it was Pietrangelo that was closing him down and coming back on the back check. And I think if he tried to go forehand, Pietrangelo probably strips him of the puck or just takes away the scoring chance. So I think he had to go backhand, and Hill able to close the 5-hole. And much like Cousins failing to score on that yawning net in game 1, I almost feel like those have been the 2 key moments so far for the Panthers, like golden opportunities that they didn't convert. And then, Lomberg takes a bad penalty, and power play, it's 1-0. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, I think they got outskated most of the night. They got outbattled most of the night. Their positional play has not been good. My Lord, that fifth goal, like early in the third period, they score 15 seconds in or 14 seconds in. And that there's that glimmer of hope off in the distance. Like maybe they can make a game of this at least and have some momentum going into game 3. And, 4 minutes later, they make a ridiculously horrible change and 4 guys go along the boards and there's nobody in the, in the middle of the ice or anywhere else in the zone. And just like that, it's back to 5-1. So the positional play wasn't good. The passing wasn't good tonight. There are very, very few things you could say positively about tonight's game.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that you could say positively about the Panthers is how they came out in the third period. To that, even though in the middle of that, with Tkachuk getting the misconduct after the hit on Jack Eichel.
You want to get me started on that?
Yeah, let's go right into it.
I would love to hear Stephen Walkom explain how Tkachuk gets a misconduct. Because there was no penalty on the hit. If you look at the play-by-play sheet, it's Tkachuk for roughing against Barbashev, Barbashev roughing against Tkachuk, and both get 10-minute misconducts. He and you saw it on the replay. Eichel kind of toe-picked himself into that hit, and it was a clean hit. 2 guys jump Tkachuk, which that's a whole other subject about having to fight after clean hits or getting into scrums after clean hits. That's another discussion. But what's he supposed to do? Let himself get pummeled? I don't understand where the 10 comes from. If you want to give him 2 for roughing, okay, that's fine. It's a scrum. But where he gets taken out of the game for 10 minutes, I completely do not understand that. That's a joke. And then the referees just didn't want to put up with him anymore to get the second misconduct for not even a slash of the stick, just tapping the stick out of a guy's hand after the play's over. The referees tonight just didn't want to deal with him. So that shouldn't be an excuse. It shouldn't. You're playing for the Stanley Cup. And the game's over at that point. I get it. But the first one is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, and you can maybe understand the second one, even though it was a tap, because of how out of hand it was of this little thing called preventive officiating. I can kind of see that. Yeah, game management as well, because I mean Duke got a misconduct. Nick Cousins, Eric Stahl. I might be missing one person.
And I think 3 of their guys got one too. So
yeah, so Barbashev as well.
Kolesar,
Casey Fitzgerald got a misconduct. So it's a whole, but it's misconducts galore on the night for the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights. But yeah, but also when it comes to the Florida Panthers, it was also bad pinches. That one that led to the Amadio goal that Mahura pinched, and then it was on a delayed penalty that Reinhart slashed Carlson there as well. So it was all bad positioning all night for the Florida Panthers.
It's been a really, in my mind, and I don't mean to pick on one guy because there was a bunch of guys that haven't played well the first 2 games, and I thought he was fine in the regular season and pretty decent through the first 3 rounds, but I think Mahura is just having a terrible final. These first 2 games, he has just been. It's been bad.
We haven't picked on him this season.
I don't mean to pick on just one guy, but it's been really noticeable.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned that Paul Maurice went 11 F7D on the night as well, putting Casey Fitzgerald in, and looks on the third goal. It looks like that he might have screened Sergei Bobrovsky. I mean, even when the Florida Panthers have looked to check the puck out of the Vegas Golden Knights stick, the Vegas forecheck was still strong and still able to keep the puck. I mean, you talk about the third goal of the night for the Vegas Golden Knights. Let me check. Nicholas Waugh still keeping it and being patient with the puck as well. And
I think on that too, Fitzgerald and Mark Stahl really had no idea what each other was doing. They don't play together, and I think they got completely confused as to who was doing what.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But I'm not a big fan of the 11-7. I would have rather seen, even if you're going to use a forward for 5 or 6 shifts, just with the depth that Vegas has with their 4 lines, I think it's tough to match up 11 forwards against that. I would have much rather seen Dalpe or, give one of the Black Aces a shot. I mean, you might, like I said, you might use him 5 or 6 shifts. I just don't see what putting Casey Fitzgerald in there does.
Yeah, especially when he played only 4 regular season games for the Panthers. I just didn't quite understand that move for Paul Maurice putting him in that position for the Florida Panthers there. But the Florida Panthers down 0-2 now as the series shifts to Sunrise, Florida. But now you got the games out of the way, and it's time to change venue, get a few days off, reset everything. And now the Florida Panthers will have the opportunity to protect home ice on Thursday night. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2. We're going to discuss more about the defensive breakdowns for the Florida Panthers, and of course, ask the question later on in the show: is it time to panic? We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right. First time around, just add to your ride to my garage and look for the green check mark so you know the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, right fit, the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Segment number 2 here on this Tuesday, June 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I have Frank Forte here, the former sideline reporter and producer for Fox Sports Florida, here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And, after the Vegas Golden Knights scored that 4th goal, I mean, you knew that you just couldn't continue to leave Sergei Bobrovsky out to dry there. I mean, you think it looks like that the Vegas Golden Knights, they clear the zone, and then the Florida Panthers don't have any eyes on Brett Howden, and let's mention that Brett Howden scored 2 goals on the night and goes forehand backhand on Bob. Nothing Sergei Bobrovsky would do. And we spoke about how the Florida Panthers were just so much shifted to one side. And you even mentioned earlier that on the 4th goal, not only was there 4 players on the ice, but you see Aaron Ekblad drawing too much to his right.
Yeah, it's actually the 5th goal, but yeah,
on the 5th goal.
Yeah,
but it's just, I don't think it's up for debate going into game 3 for the Florida Panthers. You got to put Sergei Bobrovsky back in the net. You can't. This performance by the Florida Panthers is just a whole bunch of breakdowns. Yeah. The Vegas Golden Knights were finishing their checks. The Florida Panthers weren't. The middle of the ice was open as can be for Vegas. You cannot. And I will not take any Bob slander on the night for the Florida Panthers.
This was not on him tonight. I don't think he saw any of the first 3 goals until it was way too late.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the 4th one, you have a guy flying right down the slot unchecked, and he goes forehand, backhand, and it's over. And at that point, just for Bob's mental state, you got to get him out of there. And I don't think it's any question they go back to him. By the way, if I can gloat just a little bit,
go for it.
The last time you had me on was the Boston series.
Game
and
4.
You asked me for game 4, did they go to Bob or did they stay with Lyon? And what did I tell you?
You said they go to Bob, right?
Yeah, I said for whatever reason, I think the Magic had deserted Lyon at that point. He was great in the end of the regular season and in game 2, but at that point I thought the Magic had left him. And what did Bob do? I mean, he played like all-world Bob until this series. And again, tonight wasn't on him. The only goal in this series, unfortunately, I think was what turned out to be the game winner in game 3. You could tell by in game 1 rather. You could tell by his reaction, what turned out to be the game winner that made it 3-2, that he felt he should have had it. But I think that's really the only goal you can really put on him. this series. And tonight they just played very poorly in front of Bob. And also, if I can kind of go on a tangent a little bit, I know you're supposed to be over these things 6 years later, but I still can't get over handing Jonathan Marchessault to the Las Vegas Golden Knights in the expansion draft. I thought it was a ridiculous decision at the time. 6 years later, it looks even worse. And that's for me, one of the three most unforgivable moments in Panther or decisions in Panther history. And I know 6 years later, we're supposed to be over it, but I'm sorry, I'm hanging on to that one.
It's funny because had the Florida Panthers not faced the Vegas Golden Knights in the final, we wouldn't be having this conversation, or even if this wasn't even the matchup. But it's crazy how narratives can change as you see these two teams face off against each other, and 12 goals in 12 games. I mean, the conversation was Jack Eichel leading for the Conn Smythe going into this series, but I think that might have changed going into.
Think about this: Marchessault is making $5 million. It's not like he's this hugely paid player. His production per dollar paid is outlandish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely huge for the Vegas Golden Knights and how they conducted the expansion draft, and then you even see how a few years later a lot of teams learned their lessons with Seattle and not giving them anything. And as far as
how many general managers, including the Panthers, there were like 5 or 6 of them, panicked over losing a particular player and gave Vegas extra assets to take player B. It boggled my mind then, and it still boggles my mind. That's one I may never get over, Armando. I got to be honest with you. I don't care if they were playing Vegas or not. I still wouldn't be over that one.
Yeah, and you never know. You never know. It's funny because a lot of the conversation was if you keep Jonathan Marchessault, then you don't get X player. But look at what's going on with him and all. So with that, but with let's talk about a little bit of the Panthers and their physicality in this game and even in the series. And of course with the skirmishes and all that stuff, of course we saw how game one, Adin Hill goes after Nick Cousins with the blocker. Something I didn't really talk about in the leading up to game two, because I thought it was going to be more settled now, but I couldn't be more wrong on that. And then of course McNabb cross-checks Tkachuk into the crease on the power play, and then of course Adin Hill goes after Tkachuk there as well.
Adin Hill's gotten away with 2 so far in this series, 1 in each game.
Yeah, and
I don't understand it.
Yeah,
now,
I don't.
Again, it's not
either.
the reason the Panthers lost. I'm not blaming the officiating for the Panthers losing the game, but I mean these calls seem incredibly obvious to me as a longtime hockey fan and reporter, and I just don't get it.
I don't.
But I think to get to your point about the physicality, I think it was kind of telling because somebody asked Tkachuk before game one about the physicality, and he goes, well, that's just who we are. That's how we play. And I almost think the Panthers, and it's a fine line, as you well know, Armando, between physicality and going overboard and hurting your team. And I almost think like the Panthers have convinced themselves they have to be super macho to have a chance in this series. And I think so far it's hurting them.
Yeah. I was wondering that before, and now that we see it through 2 games, I mean, Vegas has the clear size advantage too. So I think they also see that as a factor there, because prior to game 2, I was looking up, okay, what are the size advantages for Vegas versus Florida? And I was seeing that Vegas was 6th as far as weight, while Florida was last in the NHL in that as well. So I feel like the Florida Panthers are, like you said, they have to play a little macho in order to get there. But they had 32 penalty infraction minutes in game 1. Tonight, I mean, God, it's looking at, I don't want to subtract all the misconducts. I'm not going to do that, but it was 84 to 64. Florida having more of the penalty infraction minutes as well. So
I just think there's 2 things that are pretty obvious to me at this point. One is I think they've like I said, they have it in their head that they have to play even after the whistle a certain way. And I think they've taken it too far. And the other thing is, I think Adin Hill he's played really well, but I think Vegas has really limited the grade A chances. But for some reason, Adin Hill is in their heads. It just appears that way to me. So, I don't know what you do to turn the series around. You just got to play better positionally. You got to skate harder. You mentioned the puck retrieval earlier. Even the second goal. I mean, to me, Duclair makes a really soft play in the corner and allows them to retain possession of the puck. He didn't take the body. He just kind of pokes at the puck, and before you know it, it's in the net. So, I mean, there's just got to be better decisions made on the ice.
Yeah, and even towards the end of the game when it was clearly over, when it was 6-2, you see that the Florida Panthers are trying to get a deflection in from behind the net, and you see Shea Theodore having the puck right on the line. And it's like, well, that's the Panthers' night. Nothing's going to go their way. To
that point, if I may, Armando, and I tweeted this earlier tonight for anybody who follows me. I said, I can't kill these guys too bad because I never expected to be in this position when the postseason started. And I think a lot of things had to go, like a lot in capital letters, a lot of things had to go right for the Panthers to be here. And I think you would agree that as well as they played, a lot of things went their way. And in this series, that's not happening. So, and the play you pointed out is a really good example, the Adin Hill just putting the stick out, and Nick Cousins has 95% of the net to shoot at in game one, and he hits the stick. So when things like that aren't going your way, then I think we all know that Vegas is a super deep team. And during the season, we all said, I think, that the Panthers had a flawed roster. And now this is because when things aren't going, when you're not getting those kind of bounces, then the disparity of the rosters kind of rears up and says, this is what it is.
Yeah. And not to discredit what, and I know you're not doing this. It's not to discredit what they've done to this point and all that stuff.
No, not at all.
But also the troubles that they had through the regular season. It's coming back to them. It's like, okay, we saw how tight things were in the first three series, and of course sometimes it has a little bit of a not necessarily time running out, because there's still time in this series as well for them. But sometimes
I think you put it right when you look at that, how close that Carolina series was. One bounce here, one bounce there, and it's a 2-2 series instead of a sweep. I'm not discrediting what they've done at all. I mean, they played their tails off to get to this point.
No doubt.
But I think a lot of things did go their way. Bob got super hot. When you look at, some of the things that happened in the Toronto and the Carolina series, getting a bounce here or a non-call there or whatever it was, a lot of things, my point is, a lot of things had to go right for them to be in the Stanley Cup Finals. And through 2 games, not very much has gone right.
Yeah, and perfect example we could point to was that even the review in Game 5 in the Toronto series as well, right before the Florida Panthers did win that one. So sometimes certain things just go your way and certain things don't. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to ask the question: is it time to panic for the Florida Panthers as they head back to Sunrise, Florida? We're going to discuss this next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Segment number 3 here on this June 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers lose to Vegas Golden Knights by a final score of 7-2 in Game 2 as the series now shifts to Sunrise, Florida. I got Frank Forte here, former sideline reporter / producer for Fox Sports Florida. And Frank, I think about really the journey, and I think this is the best way to put it: the journey between the Panthers and all the issues that they went through going into the season with Cap having to make that trade for Tkachuk and all that stuff, and then of course being in the position that they're in. And I think I know what your answer is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. With the Florida Panthers and the lack of expectation to be here, and then of course going on the road, losing a very close game 1, the final score will tell you differently. And then of course the wheels falling off here. But now the series shifts to Sunrise, Florida. It's not dropping 2 games at home. That's the good news. But now you get an opportunity to come back to FLA Live Arena Thursday night. Is it time to panic for the Panthers?
My answer, and probably not a lot of fans will agree with me, is no. And the reason being, I tweeted this before the Boston series, I had 0 expectations for the playoffs. So whatever happened, I was going to say at least they didn't go from President's Cup to out of the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I didn't want to be that team. So I said, if they have any success in the playoffs, I'm just going to enjoy it, and whatever happens, happens. So am I panicked? No. Do I think they can come back and win this series? You got to win 4 out of 5. I don't see that happening. But I'm not panicking only because I didn't have expectations coming into it. Do I want to win the cup? Hell yes. I mean, I covered this team from day 1, 1993. So I've seen it all. And, when they made the cup final in 96, it's kind of like the Dan Marino Dolphins. You think, oh, yeah, they can get back there. Well, it's been 27 years. I hope it's not another 27 because we could all be gone by then. But no, I'm not panicked simply because I just didn't have a lot of expectations going into the playoffs. So I enjoyed the heck out of the first 3 rounds. I bought my conference champion shirt, just in case it didn't work out in the finals. You know what? As a team, you can't panic. You can't get into that mode. Otherwise it's going to be over quickly. So get back to playing your game, kind of rein in the emotions a little bit, and hopefully get some things straightened out. Because again, I think positionally, they've not played very well at all. They've been drawn out of position way too often in their own zone. They've been outskated. They got to manage the puck better, and you got to figure out a way to negate Vegas's, as you said, puck retrieval. You got to be harder on the puck when those board battles come along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm trying to calculate quickly Vegas's playoff road record here. I know they won 2 games in Winnipeg. They 2-0 and then 2-1 in the Vegas series. That would make them 4-1. So they're 6-2 on the road in the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a great road record during the regular season
Yes.
too. They were actually a better road team than they were home team. That's the bad news about the Vegas Golden Knights going into Game 3. The good news is, ever since the 2 games against Boston in games 3 and 4, the Panthers have been a lot better at home. The only game that they lost since was Game 4 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and even that game was a pretty close game for the Panthers there. So
yeah, I think it was 2-1, right?
Yes, it was a 2-1 loss against the Toronto Maple Leafs there. But it was just a big turnaround for the Panthers from what happened early on to now. And of course, with the excitement that the fan base is, I'm going to be at both games 3 and 4. Hopefully there is a game 6, so I could also be there as well.
Yeah.
But also with the Panthers going back home, and of course with the experience factor in Paul Maurice, I know people don't want to hear that right now of what the message sending that he's going to discuss in the room. he isn't going to panic neither. He's like, okay, the bad news is you got outclassed and outplayed, outskated, outchecked. But in that game 2 is only one game.
Yeah.
If you really think about it,
it's match play. It's not stroke play, as I like to say.
Love the golf term there. Love it, Frank. There when it comes to that. So
yeah.
So
I just really worry if Gudas is not available. I think that's a big hole in that bottom 6 or that the defensive 6 group. Casey Fitzgerald does not fill me with any kind of confidence. If they have to go without Gudas, I'd really like to see Lucas Carlson get a chance.
He had a great year in the AHL.
Yeah. I mean, he deserved it. He deserves it based on that, in my book. Whether they go that way or not. And again, we don't know what Gudas' status is, but based on the fact that he didn't come back in tonight's game, I'd be pretty surprised if he played.
Yeah, and Radko Gudas, just like game 1, he left early in game 1. The only difference was he didn't come back in this one. But let's also not forget that Eetu Luostarinen didn't also skate neither.
I think that leaves a big hole in the lineup too. And again, there's no excuses this time of year.
Correct.
But Eetu had a really nice year, and now you've got to move Lomberg up to the third line. You're going with 11 forwards. I think it just throws a big wrench into the gears that this team had going. And you mentioned it early in the show, the 10 days off. And nobody really knows what the overall effect of that is because you can't go into the heads of the players.
No doubt.
But it to me, that's a hard thing to do. And particularly when you look at a goaltender. And again, has Bob been great? No. Has he been bad? No. He's just been kind of ordinary. And he was otherworldly the last 2 series. And I think 10 days off for a goaltender is really tough. 10 days off for a team. There's nothing you can do about it. It's out of their control. But I just wonder if they used up the clip, so to speak, in those first 3 series, and there just isn't much left.
Yeah.
Emotionally, physically, against a team like this. I don't know. Maybe they'll. Again, I'm not putting anything past this team, given what's happened in this postseason. I'm not saying any bridge is too far.
None.
Until Vegas gets that 4th win.
Yeah.
But I just think there's a lot of things going against them right now. A lot of it is what they're doing, and a bunch of it is what Vegas is doing. And by the way, we can talk about the Barbashev Gudas, whether it was dirty or not, but I knew Barbashev as a nice player. I had no idea he was this physical.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't watch a lot of Knights hockey in the regular season, but man, that guy is like a Tasmanian devil right now. And he's making 2.25. I looked it up, and he's
going to get paid.
And he's a UFA.
He's going to get paid.
Oh man.
That was kind of one of the guys that I was looking at when it was funny because the Florida Panthers played the St. Louis Blues or in early February. I was thinking, if the Panthers happen to be a buyer, can they make this worth? But of course, what St. Louis was looking for, it was never going to happen for the Florida Panthers as far as
not enough capital there. We didn't have enough capital left to make anything happen.
Yeah, so but he's gonna get his payday as well, and of course, very scary. Once again, very scary hit for Radko Gudas, hitting his head on the ice, and crazy enough, it's his birthday actually today too. So not a pleasant birthday for Radko Gudas as he.
And he, by the way, before he left the game, he led 2 thunderous hits.
Mm-hmm.
And you take that out, none of our other defensemen are really what you'd call hitters. And you take that physical element out against a team that's playing. Like Vegas is playing a heavy game. That's a big factor in my book.
That and the best hitting player on the Panthers is a forward in Sam Bennett as far as that. So you're missing that on the defensive front and also so that's a big loss for the Florida Panthers, and hopefully they can get him back. I'm not after 10 plus days off, I'm not even optimistic that Eetu Luostarinen will even be back in this series after what happened after 9 days off, especially since he skated and all that. But, with 2 days off going into game 3, anything could happen as far as health status as well. And of course, anything could happen as far as the Panthers and just shifting their play and going into a complete 180 going into game 3.
That's what it's got to be. That's what it's got to be. And you feel for a guy like Luostarinen who, these guys play their whole lives for this opportunity. And through, no fault of his own, just the fates, he's not getting that chance. So you really feel for a guy like that.
No doubt. But Frank, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers unfortunately lose 7-2, but there's still plenty of hockey to be played as the series shifts back to Sunrise, Florida. And tell everybody where they can follow you online and your work.
Yeah, it's at Frank J. Forte on Twitter, and also FAUsports.com. Put a lot of videos up there for working at Florida Atlantic University. Our television show on Bally Sports Florida, we're off for the summer because all our sports have concluded. So we'll be back in mid-August as when football season starts revving up. So you can see us on Bally Sports Florida, usually on Thursdays and Saturdays. Not sure what the times are going to be this coming season. We were 11:30 in the mornings. So just check my Twitter. I'm always putting it out there, what's on the show and when it's airing. And you can always go to FAUsports.com and look at previous episodes of Inside the Owl's Burrow.
Awesome, Frank. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Armando. Pleasure is mine.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steer Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every dayers, make sure you come back for tomorrow's edition of the show, where it is a Winans Wednesday of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. You will not want to miss what Jacob has to say about the Florida Panthers being down 0-2. So I'm Armando Velez with Frank Forte, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.